Hey there and welcome back to the Thinking Parallel. I'm Dr. Amir Parekh and we are going to have an amazing brand new tutorial today. Very wonderful urban landscape that we are going to be doing. Something that I really love as a style, and we are going to recreate an entire photograph into an artwork step by step completely. So you learn exactly how to sketch it, what colors to use, how to layer the artwork, where to put the light, where to put the shadow, all of it in detail. So stay tuned and remember to please press the bell icon so that you're notified anytime a new video comes in. That's every Wednesday and every Sunday. And of course, if you still haven't subscribed to the channel, do it right now. We put up various tutorials of watercolors, inks, anything that can help you with your art journey. This is the reference that we're going to be painting today. It's by the account Monsieur KY, and I love how the entire photograph looks with the scooter, with the orange and green doors, with the flowers. And we are going to break down the entire sketch into various parts so that you can actually replicate it in the way that you want to. We'll get everything into detail. Let's get started with the artwork. So we are ready to sketch this beautiful landscape, urban sketch. So we're going to look at all the elements, the doors, the leaves, the flowers, the scooter. We're starting with the Sitaram Watercolor Pad and the Botanica Sonnet watercolors from Nevsky. And we are going to be working with Sitaram Mop brushes. Let's begin with the sketch. Now in this case, we're looking at the roof is the first place, because that will help us to get a little bit of a determination on where we want to create, the outline of the leaves that I just made. Keep your vertical lines all very straight, and the horizontal, which is the angular lines for the roof, just follow the diagonal pattern as seen on the photograph to add the perspective to the entire sketch. Now you can estimate approximately how to make the sketch, or you can also use a grid. The grid will help you to be exactly in location. But since there are a lot of elements here and a lot of colors, you can be a little bit, free with the overall proportion. What you need to take care, especially in this case, like now we're making the scooter, and when you're making the scooter, see to it that it looks visibly in the front, it looks proportionately bigger. You get the curvatures correct, because when you're sketching, the proportions will be determined primarily by whether the artwork is in the front, the element is in the front, it's behind, or it's in the top. What's your perspective? This is kind of like a 1-point perspective if you look at it, but if you're very careful, you will understand that even the roof goes into the second perspective. So we are just basically getting all the primitive things, all the basic sketch outlines done. So we had the first door, the second door, the signboard, the scooter, some markings for the pots. So your sketch must be as light as possible. Get the dimensions correct, get the perspective correct. In this case, can you see how I'm making the door? So there's depth added to the door itself. Now we're adding the glass part of the door. There's a table, and I want you to notice how I just put perspective onto that stool as well. So whenever you're sketching, keep everything in perspective correctly and show the depth in your sketch. That will help things look much more realistic. You don't need to go into excessive detail right now with the pencil work. We will always since we're going to do only a watercolor, we can add more elements in the watercolor itself. I think that looks good enough to start. So you can use the ultramarine blue or the azure to make your sky. We are primarily using a wet on dry technique, but you can also work on the wet on wet if that's comfortable. For example, here I did drop a little color which became the wet on wet. Now as you can see, I am just coloring the sky, and we can move it in a little bit of a strokes, diagonal strokes, that will give the effect of clouds once it dries off. Keep it as light as possible. Now I'm taking the raw sienna and I am starting the floor, because that way while the sky is drying, I have the time to color and finish the floor. When you're working with watercolors and you are working on something like this, which you would do in plein air, you can move to multiple areas together. While these two are drying, let me kind of combine the the light red and yellow deep and get those colors in. So we get like an orange kind, darker orange kind of a shade, or a vermilion kind of a shade. And I'm just coloring the door first with that. You can use any of the greens that you have, okay, that's completely fine. Okay, whatever shade of light green and dark green you have later on, you can use for the leaves. And here you can, if you have an orange ready, you can use an orange. If not, you can mix one of the red and the yellows to create this kind of a shade. So what I'm doing is I'm just marking the the railing of the door. Not very accurate, don't worry, but it doesn't matter. With the blue I am going to correct it. Now I can see those orange red flowers, so I'm again using a little bit of that bright red, a little carmine, a little bit of the yellow deep, and I'm just using the tip of my brush in certain strokes in order to create these flowers. So leave some spaces in between them. When you're doing these kind of plants, okay, it's very important to have sufficient space between them. So again, while this is drying, if you have an emerald green, you can use an emerald green straight, or you can use a little bit of viridian hue mixed with one of the blues. Whatever green you have, add a little bit of that blue to get a little more aqua green kind of a color, or a more turquoise green color, and use that in order to create the inner part of the door, because that's going to come the darkest. So we'll put the wash layer right now itself. We're working on the wet on dry, and we are first primarily finishing all the base things. Now for the roof, if you have a burnt sienna, you can use a burnt sienna, or in this case we use raw sienna with a little bit of that purple, light purple that is there. You can use a light violet or that also. Mix that and you get a darker shade of brown. So once you get that shade, you can use that as the base of the roof. Now I'm using a lamp black. Okay, so if you have a Payne's grey, you can use a Payne's grey as well. So a lamp's black in a very diluted form will help me to get the basic colors of the scooter, and I know where there's going to be depth, so I can directly load more color onto the brush and add that. Remember, my green has already dried off, that is why I can start proceeding in the same area. If the colors are wet, they will all just blend in together, and that will make things very, very difficult for you to do. Now if you notice the design of the scooter, wherever I want the details, I've kept it much darker, much more defined, and wherever I just want the shape to come in, it's on a much more watery scale, on a much more diluted scale. That will add to the transparency of the watercolor, and in the regions where I want the depth, I have more color loaded as compared to the other areas. Remember, I just need to get the pattern of a scooter. I'm not replicating each and every detail, but immediately now I know that this is a scooter that I can clearly make out. Going back, I'm using the raw sienna primarily to add to the detail of the roof, the borders of the roof, and the wooden planks which are there. So different shades of brown are required. You can also use yellow ochre if you have that. You can use yellow ochre as well. Coming to the greens, you can use the light green, or you can use a little bit of sap green with lemon yellow. Use different shades of green in order to create textures, in order to create the patterns of the leaves as naturally as possible. So if you see how I'm doing, I'm taking some areas, dabbing the brush, changing the color in between. So what I'm getting is multiple shades of green together. You can also do one layer, mix the next green, mix the next green. I kind of work simultaneously because it saves time and it gives me variations in the shades as well. Now if you notice, I am keeping enough of white spaces in between the leaves currently, because that will allow me to add a little bit of light shades and dark shades, and it won't look too clumped up, or it won't look like just one mess. It still gives me the whole pattern that there are leaves and there's plantation and things are just coming out. If you just add blobs, it's going to not look very nice. So in between, see, I'm going with a little lighter yellow. So yeah, you guys can clearly make out the variation in the shades while I have not touched the red orange flowers that I had made. Now I finished the side of the door, same colors that I originally used with the green, blue okay, and a little bit of yellow on a much more diluted shade. I colored the windows again with an azure. So once the area is dried, you can use that azure or the cerulean blue. You can add a little bit of raw sienna or burnt sienna if you have. You can add a little lamp black to add a little darkness to that area. Don't make it very dark because we don't want it to turn black. We just want the effect that there's a shadow there. Now that the older brown area has dried off, I can go back, add a little bit of diluted lamp black again. So as you can see, it's giving a little bit of the shadow effect, and that's what I'm looking to create the depth. Now there are certain wood paneling in the roof. I'm using that wood paneling. Using the lamp black, a little bit of burnt sienna or raw sienna can also be added to it. You can also mix burnt sienna with a little bit of Prussian blue in order to create this. So try combination, see what works for you. I'm still using the 4-number brush from Sitaram. You can use a 2-number brush also or a 1-number brush also, whatever works for you. Now whenever I'm giving these borders, if you notice, they're very subtle, they're not very defined borders, but it helps me to get the clarity, helps me to define the composition much better. Okay, I just let that dry a bit and added a second layer, so you can now clearly make out the depth in the area. Now what I'm doing is a little bit of a very wet kind of and translucent kind of an area, because it's a white building. We can't really show white, so you can use violets, you can use browns, you can use blues, you can use a little black, and just give it a very light shade in different parts. Can you notice how I'm just giving a very light shade? What it does, it gives you a much more realistic effect. Now to the plants, I need to add the depth, so I'm going to go with the lamp black and a darker shade of green. You can also use a darker shade of blue, and around the plants, okay, as if you're going around the flowers, in between the flowers, in between the leaves, you're going to get the dark areas. Don't make a clump out of it. And the light spaces, please do not go on the dark flowers on the light spaces. Use the light and dark combination to create variety, to create depth, and to create more life. Leave some white spaces in between additionally, so that there's more effect, that there's light passing through. Now I'm completing the plants and the pots. Same colors that you have used above can be used. Give various shapes and strokes to add more depth. Now in this case, as you can see, that I usually mix directly on the pan itself. You're somebody who uses tubes, you can definitely have it on a mixing color palette. I primarily work in the plein air style, which means that I'm kind of working at a much faster speed. Additionally, I'm just using minimum colors. Now if you notice the reference photo, there's a wooden brick stone kind of a texture to this wall, which we had not done earlier. So I'm just adding a little bit of this raw sienna or yellow ochre, whatever you have, behind the plants. Now to the pots, I can add a little bit of carmine with the brown to get more variation in the shades. So these little subtle details will make a lot of difference as you start building your artwork. Finish your pots. If you notice behind the scooter also, I can see that empty space. I'll color that as well. So mark what areas are still missing. How will you get the depth in the right places? The top part looks finished more or less, so let's work on the lower part of the structure. Again, using that burnt sienna or raw sienna with a little carmine. I'm getting these strokes following the tile pattern which is there on the floor. Some strokes are a little thicker, some strokes are a little lighter. It's a very rough tile-like effect that I'm following. Now a very important part, the shadows. If you notice, there are no shadows that I've made yet. The shadows are going to add to the real depth. Follow the contour as if you're giving leaves going downwards. You can use violets, purples, a little bit of light shades of grey. Okay, don't keep it very concentrated because then it will look very weird. A little bit of dilution will help the shadow to look much more natural. Don't use a black directly because that grayness doesn't come out very naturally, but violet comes out much better and gives you a more visible shadow and a more realistic kind of a shadow. So use purples rather than directly using blacks. So you can see even on the door, after this is dried off, I'm using that. If you notice the door, suddenly there's a lot of depth in the door which was missing earlier, defining the shadows in all the other areas as well, including the scooter. So under the scooter also I'm putting a shadow, under the pots I'm putting a shadow, behind the pots I'm putting a shadow, behind the lamp, behind the door area. These shadows are what are going to add life. So please see to that you make sufficient. Some will be lighter, some will be darker. If you notice, the direction is also in one side because the light is falling from one side, which means that the shadow would also fall on one side. Now I'll finish the lamps with the lamp black. Okay, just some defined areas with that black. I still need to mark something. Yeah, so I'll just write on this. I just colored the stool as well with the same browns and a little bit of violet. I'm finishing with these little bit of shadows on the road. I hope this has been a fun session for you all and you all learned how to create urban sketches like this. You can do actual plein air with what you have learned today. This is just a watercolor artwork. So we've converted the entire reference photo into this beautiful sketch. I'm just adding my finishing touches wherever I feel a little more definition could help. And that's it. I think it looks ready to go. Let me unmask this completely. And we have our final sketch ready. I'm pretty happy with how this has turned up and I hope to see everybody recreate this artwork as well. Tag us at the Thinking Palette if you do. So we just finished creating this beautiful artwork and I love how it's turned out. I love the vibrancy, the entire composition, how the scooters come up, especially the flowers and the leaves, and the shadow completely added to the depth. If you guys also liked the video, remember to press the like button, leave us a comment, share on how your experience has been, how detailed the tutorial was. If you all recreate it, please post it on Instagram, tag us at the Thinking Palette. We'd love to see your works, and of course hit the bell button so that you are notified anytime a video comes up, which is every Wednesday and every Sunday, where we are going to talk about various art supplies, art tutorials, anything that's related to art. If you still haven't subscribed to the channel, this is your time to do that. I'm Dr. Amir Parekh. I look forward to taking you on this art journey together. See you later.